Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Support After Suicide Loss, Postvention for Service Members, Veterans, and Their Families. We're grateful to have you here for this important conversation as we focus on support, healing, and coordinated response after suicide loss. As we begin, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that Veterans Day is 1 week away. And this is a meaningful time to honor those who have served and to reach out to veterans and military families in our lives. Even a simple call or message can go a long way in reminding someone that they are valued and supported. So thank you to all who have served and those who support them. We also want to share that this webinar is the first in a series on postvention. We will be offering a 3-part learning community series beginning in December, where we will take a deeper dive into the topics you'll hear about today. We will provide more information later in the session. Next slide, please. All right, so my name is Chantal Boudreau, and I serve as a project associate with SAMHSA's Service Members, Veterans, and Their Families Technical Assistance Center at Policy Research Associates Incorporated, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. But before we continue, please note that today's session includes discussion of suicide loss and grief. So we encourage you to take care of yourself and step away at any time if needed. Next slide, please. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policy of SAMHSA, HHS, or VHA. Next slide, please. So SAMHSA leads efforts to ensure substance use and mental health needs among all Americans, including service members, veterans, and their families, are understood and addressed. Since 2008, SAMHSA has partnered with states and territories to strengthen behavioral health systems serving this population through the SMVF TA Center. Next slide, please. So the SMVF TA Center supports states, territories, and communities by monitoring behavioral health trends, providing technical assistance and consultations, supporting adoption of best and promising practices, connecting teams with experts and resources, and promoting cross-system collaboration. Next slide, please. Our technical assistance includes policy and implementation academies, crisis intercept mapping, webinars and learning communities, technical assistance calls, resources and toolkit development, as well as expert consultation. Next slide, please. Our objectives for today are to understand the role of postvention in supporting recovery after suicide loss, to learn how loss teams and peer support models provide support, to explore community-level postvention frameworks, and identify resources for military and veteran families navigating grief and healing. Next slide, please. So we are honored to be joined today by Denise Graham, who is with the Postvention Consulting LLC, Nicola Winkle with the Arizona Coalition for Military Families, and Dr. Carlos Patton with Tragedy Assisted Program for Survivors. So we're going to be beginning this presentation with Denise. So next slide, please. So before we begin, I just want to read a little bit of her bio. So after losing her son, Dre, to suicide in 2012, former corporate executive Denise Graham founded Lost Community Services in Columbus, Ohio, serving as executive director until 2022, before becoming director emerita. She and her husband then launched Postvention Consulting LLC, helping communities nationwide build lost teams. A certified thanatologist and certified psychological autopsy investigator, Denise contributed to nationwide suicide reporting guidelines, testified before legislators, and is a sought-after trainer and speaker. She has received a numerous number of awards for her leadership, advocacy, and dedication to postvention and healing. So Denise, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's good to see everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit about loss teams today, but before we dig into that, we will talk in general about suicide loss survivors and talk about some definitions and some data and all that kind of good stuff. So next slide, please. And next slide. The who and the how, when we think about who is impacted when there's a suicide loss. In 2023, there were 49,316 suicides across the country. Suicide is the 11th leading cause of death. It represents about 80% males. These are all approximate, and 20% females that are dying by suicide. And you can see some of the other statistics there too. Next slide, please. One of the things I like to start off with is really being clear on what the definition is of a suicide loss survivor. Sometimes you'll hear me and others talk about suicide survivors, and we don't include the word loss in there. And it can get a little bit confusing. A lot of times people think we're talking about attempt survivor. So when I tell somebody I'm a suicide survivor, people think, oh, we're glad you're still here. I didn't know that you had struggled and you had attempted. And that's not, it's a common mistake for people to make. The vernacular is not always easy. So a definition that Dr. Julie Cyril, through some research that she did out of the University of Kentucky, she identified that the kinship, proximity, and relationship category to the deceased are really unrelated if somebody considers themselves a suicide loss survivor. So it's kind of a self-identified status that people come up with. And I think that's a really important thing to mention before we head to our next slide, please, Erin, where we talk about these different categories, if you will, of the impact of suicide. That's also part of Dr. Cyril's research. What she identified through a phone study that was done, I think it was in 2018, 17, 18, somewhere in that time frame, was that through a series of questions, she and her cohort identified on average 135 people are exposed to a single suicide. So it's a lot of people that are impacted every time there's a suicide loss. So you can see the definitions here. Suicide exposed is everyone who had any kind of connection with the deceased, including witnesses. Affected are those that may have known, maybe a neighbor. We're going to see another slide here in just a moment about what categories of people might fit into these four buckets, if you will. And then suicide bereaved, short-term and long-term. A lot of times we think about suicide loss survivors and we think about people like me. I lost my son to suicide in 2012, as Chantel shared in my bio. Dre was 19 years old when he took his life. It was a game changer, to say the least. And I've learned a lot through my personal journey, but also through this work that I get to do in interacting with other loss survivors and supporting them. So it's natural to think about next of kin, parents, siblings, spouse, and children of a suicide loss, but you don't always think about neighbors and coworkers and classmates. And if we look at our next slide, please, Erin, we will see these four categories listed across the top: exposed, affected, and then short-term and long-term bereaved. And again, this is just based on Dr. Cyril's study. This isn't going to be inclusive of everything you can think of. It's just the couple thousand people through the phone survey that they did, where they were able to ask, have you been impacted by a suicide? And we're able to ask some questions of them. They were able to find these were the different types of relationships, if you will, that fell into the different categories of how they had been impacted. That may have been about the duration, it may have been about the intensity of the impact. So you can see if we look to the right, long-term suicide bereaved are some of those family members that I was mentioning, but it's also therapists. They found several therapists that talked about losing clients and also close friends. If you look at the short term, you can see close work colleagues get added in there as well, that short-term suicide bereaved. And then affected, you see it starts to broaden even more. You see classmates, coworkers, team members, neighbors, school communities. And then exposed, it's even broader. And I like to share this slide in part because it's really personal to me. When this came out, it was about 6 years after my son had taken his life. And one of my son's last tweets was RIP and a young man's name before he took his life. And this young man had taken his life a year prior to my son's death. And this wasn't somebody my son was super close to. I wouldn't call this kiddo a close friend. I would call him a classmate or a friend. So I would have put my son in the affected category. But he was clearly deeply impacted. Now, suicide's complicated. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying he took his life because this young man did. What I am saying is it clearly impacted him. It was one of the last things he said before he went on to die by suicide. So this idea of postvention and supporting people after a suicide loss, which is what postvention is in an organized fashion, is super, super important. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about the importance of providing support and resources and ultimately hope. Next slide. If we think about the suicide loss continuum of care, a lot of times we hear about this continuum of care, and I'm talking more specifically about peer support in particular. And if you go ahead and click on through this, please, you will see it starts with a on-scene response or a phone call, but it's a proactive response. And this is what we're gonna spend the rest of our time talking about during my section. There's a follow-up that takes place after that immediately, that immediate on-scene support or that phone call that was made. There may be a care basket that's sent with resources in it. There could be a book that's sent out. There's cards that are sent out, maybe right away, but also on important, difficult dates, a loved one's birthday. We in the organization I used to work with here in Columbus, Ohio, always sent handwritten cards on birthdays. And just something as small as thinking of you as you're remembering your husband this month during his birthday. It made a big difference. It made a big difference. We would get follow-up calls just from those cards. Having a social media presence and newsletters about different events and how you could find support was really important as well. Support groups, whether they're peer-led or professionally led, as well as remembrance events. And this is November. We've got the International Survivor of Suicide Loss Day that takes place the Saturday before Thanksgiving. That's something that you can Google and really find a lot of different places where that's offered throughout the country and even beyond. And then one-on-one support. This may be through counseling, mental health therapists. This could be through a companioning relationship, a peer relationship. There's a lot of different opportunities for one-on-one. And part of this continuum of care, it's meant to be, it's not one size fits all. Some people really don't like support groups. That is just not their thing, but they really appreciate being able to connect with somebody one-on-one that has a similar lived experience. So this is just a variety of ways of thinking about that suicide loss postvention response. Next slide, please. So the rest of our time, we're going to talk a little bit about loss teams. And loss teams, loss stands for Local Outreach to Suicide Survivors. The loss team model is an active postvention model, and it was created by Dr. Frank Campbell out in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He is the founder of the model. Loss team itself is not an organization. Again, it's an active postvention model. The first loss team went out in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1998. And Frank Campbell went on over the past nearly 20 years. Oh, no, that's more than 20. I lost a decade there. Nearly 30 years to go out and help other people launch similar programs in their community. And Dwayne just shared that lossteam.com website. I really appreciate you sharing that, Dwayne. The picture that's on the screen right now, it's just the homepage. It shows how many active loss teams there are. You can click through this and identify where those loss teams are. There's a lot of information on this website that's meant to be really helpful if you're looking for a loss team to get involved in, if you're looking for support, or if you're thinking about launching a loss team yourself in your community. In 2023, it's been 2 years now, Dr. Campbell officially announced his semi-retirement. This is his baby, so it's hard for him and a lot of us to fully retire. We're very passionate about this work that we get to do. But he announced his semi-retirement, and he turned over lossteam.com to Postvention Consulting LLC, which is why I'm presenting to you today. Next slide. So some thoughts, and you can click on through this, please. Some thoughts about why even have a loss team. Again, loss stands for Local Outreach to Suicide Survivors. And I want to emphasize that L, that local. It's meant to be a community support to help other community members that have been impacted by a suicide loss. Each loss team is unique in many ways. It needs to fit with their community. We don't ever want to prescribe this is exactly how your loss team is supposed to look. But there are a few things that we'll talk about that are consistent across loss teams. But why even have a loss team? I like to share to a certain extent what it was like when my son died by suicide and what it was like to be in the throes of that trauma, because that's what it was. It was trauma. It wasn't grief, not yet. It was trauma. And there were a lot of people that offered support, including my family, including law enforcement in the coroner's office. There were people there that were trying to be helpful, including many friends. And I was a really prickly survivor. Not all suicide loss survivors are, but I'm using the word prickly very deliberately because it's a gentle word, but it's an accurate description of how I behaved and acted and felt. I wanted to be left alone. People, especially in those first few days, if you talk too much, I would just look at you and say, "You're talking too much, too many words, just too much. You're completely overwhelming me." I'd had no filter whatsoever. But I had somebody a couple days after my son died reach out to me. She was an acquaintance at the time. Her name's Judy. And she reached out to me as a fellow suicide loss survivor, somebody that had lost her son 5 years prior. And she called and said, "Denise, I am so sorry. Would it be okay if I came over to visit?" And unknown to me and unknown to her, seeds of hope were planted that day when she came over to visit me. She planted those seeds of hope and she gave me a vision for, okay, she's functioning. Her hair is combed. She's giving me resources. She's telling me about a support group that she went to. She cast a vision for me and had a level of credibility that other people just didn't have in those initial days and weeks after my son's death. So I hope by sharing just a little bit about my story, you can see where a lot of the bullet points listed here where she met a lot of those. She was just able to really be this installation of hope to me that I didn't think was even possible. So the idea of healing immediately, while I wouldn't have called it that at the time, in hindsight, I can look back and say, oh my gosh, that was a lifeline. Judy was there and functioning. She didn't have a lot of words. She just sat next to me. She held my hand. She cried with me. That was powerful. She told me where to get support. So a loss team is essentially what Judy was to me, even though neither one of us knew it at the time. And what was important is this idea of a loss team is proactively going out and supporting people there on the scene or making outbound phone calls proactively to support people. And it's people don't have to find you. They don't have to Google that idea of the stumble factor. Okay, how do I get help for this? Who can help me through this? It's just a really important concept. So if we go to the next slide, where we talk about loss teams, again, I've already shared, they're unique based on your community. And if you could click on through this, there are three commonalities across every loss team, though. They're proactive. You guys keep hearing me say that they're proactive. We're not waiting for that suicide loss survivor to call us and say, hey, I've had this thing happen to me. I need help. Can you help? No, we've got credibility with key stakeholders like law enforcement or the medical examiner, whoever it may be in our community, and we proactively go out to the scene when they call us. At least one of the two trained volunteers that goes out is a peer, just like Judy was to me. It's somebody that has lived experience as a suicide loss survivor. We're not there to fix or assess or do anything like that. We're there just to say, hello, my name is Denise. I've been impacted by a suicide loss myself. I'm just here to provide any support I can. I'm so sorry for your loss. And then we shut up. We shut up at that point. We're going to wait and see where those people are that we just introduced ourselves to want to take this. And it may be standing there in silence. And we got to be real comfortable with that. The third commonality across loss teams is really the purpose. It's about providing support and resources and understanding. And if you click a couple more times, ultimately, it's about being that installation of hope. That's the ultimate goal. There's no fixing this. We're not going to get there and make everything all better. There's nothing anybody can say to fix this, but you want to be there as that installation of hope. And one more slide, please. So just at a high level, and this is what we'll spend some time on during the learning community next month, and you can click on through this, please. This is what a loss team, how the process might work. So you might have somebody that's acting in a volunteer role as the phone dispatcher. So in Columbus, Ohio, which is where I launched a loss team, we had the coroner's investigator that was on scene that would call us and say, here's where we are, here's the name, here's what you need to know. Can you send out a team? And at that point, a team of at least two, sometimes three people, and at least one of those trained volunteers would be a suicide loss survivor themselves. They would meet at a McDonald's or at a grocery store, wherever, and then they would all drive together to the scene within a set period of time. The first time a volunteer goes out, they're paired with someone that's already been out. Now, somebody's got to be first when you initially launch a loss team, but this is in general how the process works. And a few more clicks there. Sorry about that. Thank you. So we're there to serve the bereaved, to support the bereaved, and we do a debriefing and feedback with each other. This is emotionally heavy work. That's an understatement. It's really important that loss teams have a healthy infrastructure for supporting and equipping their volunteers, both to go out on scene, but also to debrief and to have a lot of self-compassion and self-care after being on scene. And then from there, we follow up with the newly bereaved. A loss team is not meant to be one and done. We are there to provide support and hope and resources. And then we hope when we leave that scene, we're able to say, would it be okay if someone contacted you in the next week just to check in and to see if there's anything else we could do, if there's any other resources we could help with? And that hopefully is the beginning of a relationship, just like it was for me with Judy that came to visit me a few days after my son died. So sometimes these responses are on scene. That's ideal, but sometimes it's in the next day or two. They're not always. It's not always possible for them to be on scene, but it's still a proactive, peer-based approach. So that's kind of an overview of what loss teams are and why they exist and how they might function. And I'm looking forward to digging deeper next month. That's everything I had. The next screen is my final slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Denise, for sharing your work and your insight. And we're definitely looking forward to hearing more on the learning community. I also just want to say thank you to everyone for the questions in the Q&A pod. We will be answering some of those at the end of the session. We'll be doing those live. And so now we're going to move to our next presenter, Nicola Winkle. Thank you. Before I begin, I just want to share a little bit of her bio. So Ms. Winkle is the project director for the Arizona Coalition for Military Families, a nationally recognized partnership supporting service members, veterans, families, and communities. She helped create Arizona's Be Connected program, focused on upstream prevention and reducing suicide risk. With over 20 years in the nonprofit sector, she specializes in program development, project management, and sustainability. Her work includes consulting on state and national initiatives, such as the Be Resilient program and the White House Prevents initiative. She holds an MPA from the University of Illinois and a systems thinking certificate from Cornell, and has received the Adjutant General Medal and recognition as one of Arizona's 48 most intriguing women. So with that, Nicola, thank you for joining us, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chantel. And thank you, Denise, for sharing your son and your story with us. It is so helpful to really understand that perspective and better equip ourselves to support others who might experience that. So thank you so much. So I'm Nicola Winkle. I'm project director for the Arizona Coalition for Military Families. I'm also co-lead for our Arizona Governor's Challenge team. I am the spouse of a veteran. My husband Thomas served in the Marine Corps in Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm during the first Gulf War. So like for many of us, this work is both personal and professional, but I'm very pleased to be with you today to talk to you about community-based postvention response and how we've worked to strengthen care and coordination here in Arizona, and sort of the development of that over the past couple of years. Next slide, please. So I will talk a little bit about our upstream prevention model, just so you know what the backdrop is and the foundation work that we have done that supports this postvention work. And then I'll talk a little bit about how our focus on postvention has developed and evolved over time. Talk about our partner protocol that we developed for a more coordinated care and response for survivors in our community. And then I will talk about our Be Connected community guide to postvention and share some of the content from that. So next slide. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our upstream prevention model here in Arizona. Next slide. So the Arizona Coalition for Military Families, we're a public-private partnership and a collective impact initiative. So we focus on engaging helpers, organizations, and communities, and our goal is a coordinated ecosystem of support. The coalition was established in 2009, And then Be Connected is our statewide upstream prevention program. We have about 500,000 service members, veterans, and their families who live across Arizona. And we focus across all social determinants of health. And Be Connected was established in 2017. Next slide. Here you can see sort of our visual representation of our ecosystem of support for our service members, veterans, and their families. And these are the 5 domains that we work across. So when we're trying to affect change with our collective impact initiative, when we're trying to improve care and support for our SMVF population, these are the 5 domains that we work across. So people is the service members, veterans, and their families themselves. We also focus on helpers. So those are both formal and, just kind of natural helpers in the community. We focus on organizations, both public and private sector organizations. And we focus on communities, which is geographic communities, but can also be more topically based, things like the faith-based community. And then we focus on systems. So what are those systems that serve the population that we serve? And are there ways that we can improve how those systems work together and how they serve our focus population? So those are our 5 domains. Next slide. And this combination of having ACMF and Be Connected allows us to work across and combine resources from multiple sectors, and it allows us to approach a complex issue like suicide with multifaceted data-driven solutions. And it really has been important to expanding our focus on suicide outside of crisis intervention and really push ourselves further upstream. Next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit about sort of how our kind of real specific focus on postvention has evolved. It is certainly something that we have known for a very long time, of course, about the increased risk of suicide to those who are suicide loss survivors. And we've had the opportunity through the Technical Assistance Center to really advance our work as a community and to really focus on it. I want to just share a little story, 2 stories actually, that are kind of like bookends for this work. Next slide. So about 2.5 years ago, one of our VSOs, our veteran service organizations, was holding their statewide convention where everyone from around the state for that VSO was convening. And we got notified that one of the people in leadership of that VSO had taken his own life in the hotel room during the convention. And as you can imagine, this was incredibly traumatic, not just for all the members of that VSO, but the whole VSO community. It was really had a huge impact. And our community kind of came together. The VA, Be Connected, other organizations came together to provide support. But what it really highlighted for us was that it didn't feel as, I guess, seamless and as clear about who would do what and how that would all unfold. So this had kind of happened, and we got the support in place, but it really occurred to us that there was probably a better way to go about that so that we were more prepared to help in those kinds of situations. So that situation happened, and the effects linger to this day, of course. It is on a large scale like that. It was a huge impact, and as Denise referenced, different people would be affected in different ways over time, and you really see that. The other situation I wanted to share is that late last year in 2024, we found out that we had lost a very dear colleague of ours who was a clinical psychologist. He was someone who we had worked with for over a decade, brilliant psychologist, wonderful teacher and trainer, had trained hundreds of clinicians over the years, and probably heard in, helped people process some of the most difficult trauma, worked specifically with veterans. And uh, we found out that he took his life. And that was incredibly devastating, continues to be to this day. And again, just made us understand like the importance of wrapping support around his family, and also just really reinforce the importance of this work that we're doing. So, this is something that's very personal to our community and our partners, and really helps us stay focused. Next slide. So in July of 2023, we had the opportunity to join the TA Center's Suicide Mortality Review Policy Academy. This was the first time. And uh, we went into this really focused on developing our ability to conduct a veteran suicide mortality review, and we have done that. But interestingly enough, there was a lot of support and TA available around Postvention. And I have a little note here that says, thank you, Denise and Carla, because I said it was very fitting that the three of us are presenting together because both of them provided technical assistance for us at that academy and really helped us to kind of hone this focus on Postvention. So they are a big part of our kind of story of how this has all come about, and we're very grateful for the input that they have provided to us at that beginning stage, to help us move down this road. So that was sort of the starting point. And on the next slide, you can see that we had two goals. So as I mentioned, we have developed and implemented a veteran-specific suicide mortality review process. So doing case reviews of veterans who have died by suicide to better understand the causes and develop recommendations. But the second goal that we set during that academy was to streamline and expand our postvention resources. And so those two goals, we worked them side by side from the beginning. And we're really, again, grateful that the TA Center provided all the subject matter experts around postvention, because that was incredibly important to sort of the development of this. Next slide. Now, what we found actually over the past year is that 25% of the cases reviewed by our veteran suicide mortality review team had a family history of suicide. So again, this just reinforces how critically important postvention support is. And as a result of that, postvention support and expanding that and developing that further is one of the 6 recommendations for implementation coming out of our VSMR work from the first year. Next slide. So as we, as a team, made the decision to include postvention as a focal point, we decided to focus on 2 things to start. And one was an internal partner protocol for a coordinated postvention response. So what this is really intended to be is that if we get a call like we got when the VSO loss took place, we wanted it to be very clear exactly who will do what, who's involved, who are the points of contact. So this is not something public, it's just something that is for our partners, and just really helped lay out exactly how we would go about responding. And then the other goal we set was to create this work product, which was a community guide for postvention support for individuals, families, organizations, and communities. So next slide, I'll talk about the internal protocol just briefly, just about sort of what the contents of that were. It's not something super visual. It's just an internal document. So on the next slide. So we defined the scope of the protocol because it is very important to understand that like the VA obviously has their procedures for what they do in a postvention situation. So the protocol is not meant to supersede any of that or conflict with any of that. So we really set what is sort of the scope of what it is supposed to be. Defining postvention for those who might end up involved with this effort, but maybe are not as familiar, and really clarifying exactly, again, what are we focused on with this. And then a section on preparation. So again, identifying those points of contact, having all the materials ready to go. And this is all can be done in advance. And then looking at what are some support options. So I'll talk a little bit later about how we can do training. We can help connect people to resources, provide that coordination if you have a multi-agency response, and then doing some of that follow-up. And then it has resources as well. So that's our internal protocol that we have available to our partners in case of situations. Next slide. So I'll talk more about our Be Connected Community Guide to Postvention. So this was really born of us wanting to have something that we could use to support our community. And on the next slide, you can see some of the goals. So one was we really wanted an Arizona specific resource so that the information really kind of connects the dots in terms of the things that we have available in Arizona to support, and it fits in with this ecosystem of support. It's part of this larger picture of upstream prevention. And another goal of the team was really to have a unified postvention message across our partners. So understanding how important it is that we sort of be able to put this collective message out and show that we are all working together around this important service and support to our community. We envisioned that the guide could serve as an educational tool for the community about the importance of postvention. So not limited to use after an actual loss, but more that it could also be a way to help people understand the importance of providing postvention support and kind of put it on their radar that this is something that exists if they aren't aware of it. And then also that they understand that there is this larger world of support available. And our hope is that if there is a loss, then they are having that even a little bit of awareness would put them in a better position to be able to engage that support to help that person or that community, and just know that they can reach out for help is, part of our goal. So, and then we also, the dual purpose, in addition to sort of that proactive education, was also to provide practical guidance in the moment. So if you have somebody who is supporting an individual, family, organization, or community that has experienced a loss, we wanted this to be something that could also provide extremely practical guidance to someone in that situation, understanding that it is going to be a very challenging time, and really push ourselves to try to make it as user accessible as possible, understanding that it would probably be used in a time of great stress. Next slide. Just wanted to share a little bit about our development process, because it was very important to us that this, again, had a connection to our overall prevention work here in Arizona, but also that it was trauma informed, that it really would be sensitive to the audience that we're trying to reach. So you can see here, we had many steps over the course of the process. So we kind of just first brainstormed like what should be included. We had a team that helped kind of research what resources already exist, what was relevant information. We were able to find some things like for like the educational setting, things like that. But we were able to kind of just see like what else is out there. And we developed a draft guide, and then got the teams, and when I say team here, I mean the Veteran Suicide Mortality Review team, got their input. And then we moved to laying it out in a guide format, and we did a group feedback session, which I'll show you a little picture of that in a minute. And then we received help from the SMVF TA Center for subject matter expert review. Again, really important to us to have people who are very experienced with this give us feedback about how it read. Denise actually was one of those reviewers for us. We had multiple reviewers, and they really helped us, I think, catch things that are hard to see from the inside, that really just vastly improved the end product. So we're really grateful for that. We finalized and then released print and digital versions of the guide at our annual statewide symposium in April of this year. So that was the process, and we really made every attempt to be as thoughtful as possible about how we put it together, and to pay as much attention to detail as we could so that it could be the best possible resource for our community. Next slide. So this is our team, and you'll see here what we did actually was we blew up the pages into like poster size, and then we actually had people go through and give us feedback directly on those. And that was a really neat experience, I think, for everybody, because it was a very tangible version, but it was also sort of this team interactive sort of approach, which was great. All right, next slide. I will just talk now a little bit about the contents. So we include talking just about Be Connected Postvention. We talk about a little bit of education about postvention focus points, and then we go into practical postvention help. We cover self and community care for helpers. We talk about how Be Connected can be of help in these situations. We also have a section on following an attempted suicide, differentiating that, as Denise said, from suicide loss survivors, and then have some resources available for people. So I'm just going to show a couple of screenshots. We have a link, and you are welcome to download a digital copy if you'd like to see more closely. But on the next slide, so this was referenced already, the 135 people affected by suicide loss on average. And also in this arc, it's a little bit hard to see, but it talks about sort of, again, that array of people that may be affected, because sometimes people do get into this idea of like, I'm not that close or something like that. So really trying to, again, educate that that's not really necessarily what it's about. On the next slide, we have this section on being aware of self-blame and grief shame. So, talking about like hindsight, I should have seen this coming. How could I not know she was struggling? It can take the form of minimizing, a long time has passed, I should feel better. Can take the form of judgment. I've never seen you cry about this. It doesn't seem like you care. So just trying to name some of these things so that if people are experiencing them, understand. I always say that, like, I feel like when you print something like this in a booklet or something, it normalizes it to the certain extent that somebody can say, well, this happened. People think this enough that they actually put it in this book, So that's sort of what we're trying to illuminate a little bit, that if people are experiencing some of these thoughts or whatnot, that this is something that does happen, and just to kind of be aware of it. Next slide. Then we have sections for practical postvention help. So we do the first 30 days, and then we do 30 days plus. Again, trying to reinforce the idea that this is a lifetime for people who are affected with this. And so we kind of attend to the things that are very immediate, but also that longer term impact. And then also we have it split up by immediate family members, but then also community members and organizations. And again, by doing it this way, we're trying to reinforce the idea that, yes, of course, the immediate family, they're going to be the ones most affected, but that really trying to like make people understand too, if you have a close community, if you have an organization and that person was a part of that, it is completely normal and expected that there would be an impact there too. And it is important for us to attend to that in postvention because of the increased risk of suicide. And, there is just a lot of support that can be provided to people that can be helpful to them. Next slide. This section is about self and community care for helpers. So just trying to these are very basic things, but just trying to, again, reinforce the idea that it is really important as helpers that we take care of ourselves, that we care for one another, and just recognize that you cannot necessarily be in this role, especially over time, without attending to your own self-care needs. Next slide. The next slide is the section on following an attempted suicide. So again, broken down by the first 30 days and then 30 days plus. And that, of course, addresses the individual who who had attempted suicide, but also the immediate family, community members, and organizations. We've received a lot of feedback from this that people really appreciated that we included it. There was some discussion about whether it made sense to include it. We did end up including it, and we received a lot of feedback from people that they appreciated that because they think that's a really important dimension of all this, and can be a very important aspect of prevention. Next slide. And then we have a brief resources section. We're really sort of focused on the primary ones. You'll see taps on there. Partly just because, again, people are going to very likely be in sort of an overwhelming situation. So we really wanted to keep this as kind of focused as possible. Next slide. Okay, so I'll just talk a little bit to close us out on our Be Connected Postvention program. So we do have the guide. It's available both as digital download, and we also have print copies that we share in our community. So that is sort of our proactive educational resource, but also the support that people can use when there is a loss. And then we have postvention education for organizations and communities who want to learn more, if they want to be equipped to help. We are available to provide that. And then we also provide postvention support to individuals, organizations, and communities after a loss. So this is non-crisis and not necessarily meant to be like immediate help, like a loss team, but more that we are there to help ensure that there's connection to the resources that are available. So things like, with the VSO, when the next year when they had their convention, it was the 1-year anniversary of this loss, and they're gathering again. So we were able to provide some additional support, engage mobile crisis teams, things like that. And so that kind of coordination and support is something that we provide in our community as well, again, across individuals, organizations, and communities. Next slide. So I know Dwayne shared it, but this is the link to where you can view and download the community guide to postvention. Sincerely appreciate your time today, and happy to answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for the thoughtful overview and just sharing the incredible work that is going on in Arizona. It's very interesting to see, and I know that there are a lot of people that are looking forward to hearing more in the learning community session. For timing, we're gonna move now to Dr. Carla Stuff-Patton. But again, before I get started, I just wanna read her bio. Dr. Carla Stuff-Patton is the Vice President of the Suicide Prevention, Intervention, and Postvention at the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, or TAPS, where she leads suicide-related programs and helped develop the TAPS suicide prevention model. A suicidologist specializing in grief, trauma, and suicide, she holds a degree in psychology, counseling, and counseling psychology, a licensed mental health counselor and national board certified counselor. Dr. Stuff-Patton is the surviving spouse of the Sergeant Richard Stumpf, a U.S. Marine Corps drill instructor and a Gulf War era veteran who died by suicide in 1994. Dr. Stuff-Patton, thank you for sharing that and for being here with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chantel, and to Dwayne and the entire SMVF team. It's such an honor to be here, and thank you to my amazing co-presenters with Denise and Nicola. I just admire their dedication and their expertise, and to be a part of the panel. They did such an amazing job at really introducing and expanding on this topic. So some of what I share might be a little bit repetitive, but I think it's going to make sense how it all really kind of comes together. So without further ado, I'd love to get started. Thank you for that warm welcome and introduction. As you mentioned, my name's Carla Stump Patton, coming to you from TAPS. And I'd love to share a little bit more about who we are, just as a resource that could be helpful. And then I'll get into more of the content. So if we can go to the next slide. I'll just talk a little bit. Well, we've already done a lot of this, but really kind of focusing on the need around postvention and understanding that as an intervention in itself, and the goal around that, at, increasing safety and reducing risk. And part of that is how we can further build out and form this connection within communities, which we've already heard so much from Denise and Nicola about what they're doing in their local areas. And ultimately, in that bigger picture, we're always looking at kind of promoting hope, promoting this aspect of healing and growth, and connecting people who have been impacted by suicide loss. So we'll go to the next slide, please. And so just a little bit us as an organization. TAPS is I say a national nonprofit. We actually do work internationally. And so we are not funded by the government in any way. And our sole purpose is providing the care and the support to all of those who are grieving the death of anybody in the military community. So that includes around all causes of death. Of course, what we'll be focusing on today is around suicide loss. But we help across all branches of service. We support all relationships. So in addition to maybe the more commonly thought of next of kin, we do help battle buddies and fellow veterans and all relationships who are grieving the loss, regardless of the duty status, whether they're currently serving, whether they served in the past, regardless of the era, how long it has been since the person has passed. So in that regard, we have a very heavy lift. The majority of us at TAPS, well over 85% of us as staff, are bereaved loss survivors ourselves. So in that regard, we are unique. We are a peer-based grief support organization. And as some of the stories shared by Denise and Nicola, also being very impacted by that myself, as was shared in my bio. I lost my first husband 31 years ago to a death by suicide when we were a very young military couple. We were expecting our first child at the time, and this was a time also before social media, before the resources existed that we have today. There was no veteran crisis line. There were no suicide prevention coordinators. So it was a very different time, and I knew instinctually what I needed, but I didn't know what it was called, and that was postvention. And so I'm very hopeful that the progress that we have made today, now people who've been impacted do not have to go through that isolation and the connection, that disconnection, and the loss of their military community. And we have the supports and the resources to do that. And as mentioned by Denise, Dr. Frank Campbell, before his retirement, for 15 years was very involved in the work that we do at TAPS and our postvention efforts. So we're all very connected as a family here and dedicated to this, so personally and professionally. So let's go to the next slide. And I'll talk a little bit, just briefly, so you can see the vast amount of services that we have at TAPS. We are founded, our founder, Bonnie Carroll, is a loss survivor. So founded by a bereaved survivor, run by bereaved survivors, as well as some military family members and veterans, with programs designed for survivors. So as a peer-based grief support organization, we have been down this road. We have the personal lived experience. So when we can reach out to fellow family members and loved ones who've been impacted by a loss, we have been down that road and have had similar experiences. So we know what's often needed. We have very comprehensive programs and services, from casework to peer-based support to getting people referred out for counseling supports and services. We have a 24-hour, 7 days a week helpline where people can call in, run by us personally. So during this presentation or after this presentation, if you have been impacted by a death of anybody in the military community, TAP stands ready. Our services around that are free. They are not time limited. So if your loss was 10 or 20 years ago, we still invite you to check us out and to come into our support. We want to be here to help with that. So we hope that you'll keep that in mind as a resource, perhaps either in the work that you do in your communities, or if you or somebody you know who has been impacted by a loss in the military community, we stand ready to support you. Okay, next slide, please. So as we get a little bit more focused really into suicide postvention, as I said, Denise and Nicola have already done an amazing job around this. And most people are very familiar around prevention efforts kind of before suicide actions and behaviors occur, and what intervention oftentimes includes. But a lot of times people are not as familiar with postvention. And we've learned a lot about that today already. And we typically think about common people who might be in those roles. However, many times people are involved in kind of postvention and might not even know that they're providing that. So, when we think about the services, the responses, the programs, the resources, the care that occur either after a suicide attempt or a suicide death, we need that in both of those cases, which are very potentially high-risk times. We want people to kind of expand how they might be a part of that. And I think the panel today really represents the critical importance of collaborating, partnerships through communities, organizations, agencies, because suicide is complex, it's enormous, and we can't do it alone. And when we can come together and support one another and kind of fill the gaps and augment resources and supports where maybe another organization doesn't have it, we really can expand our reach. So a couple of things that I would really like you to take away, if you haven't already gotten that message, is that when we think about the picture of suicide and all of these components, that you think about postvention as a critical component of prevention strategies. It's not separate. It's not just specific to grief and loss response. That is a large part of it. However, you really need to look at it through the lens of postvention being a critical component towards future prevention efforts. For those who have been impacted by suicide, either through an attempt or a suicide loss, we know that potential risk level. So the goal is to dramatically reduce that risk, and therefore it leads into what we would consider future prevention efforts. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And I'll talk just a little bit about TAPS and the demand and really how we kind of built out our program specifically. So I mentioned a lot about our staff at TAPS. About almost 85 to 90% of our staff are loss survivors. A good amount of those are suicide loss survivors. In our database alone, we have today, it's actually probably over about 30,000 suicide loss survivors in the military community. So our services are very specific, of course, within the military service member, veteran, military family community. But sometimes we also do support a service member who may have lost a dependent to suicide, such as a spouse or a child. So, we know that we need to really kind of broaden the perspective on who we're supporting and to meet those needs. And suicide is one of the leading causes of death for people coming to TAPS for support. About a third of our survivors alone, about a little over 30%, have been impacted or bereaved by suicide loss. And as fellow survivors, bereaved suicide loss survivors, specifically ourselves, and some of us who were clinicians and focused in the field of suicidology and grief and trauma, and through the work that we were doing, we realized that, postvention and suicide-related bereavement really required very specialized programming and response. And we recognize that organizationally, that even then we needed to expand and grow out our programs around that. So by doing that, we knew we needed to really create that safe place where people could process those kind of unique concerns and emotions related to suicide that are often very different from other causes of death, where they could share some of those experiences and connect to peers. And so next slide, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that came to be. So we started to build this out around 2008. And again, we called Dr. Frank Campbell, who is a dear friend now and who was a mentor in the field and then became a tremendous part of our TAPS family as well, kind of helping us as we built this program out. And in 2009, we started the first ever TAPS Military Suicide Loss Survivor Seminar, kind of a big name. But really what we wanted to do was to have an annual event for those who were bereaved by suicide, specifically within the military community. And actually, next week, we are going to be holding our 17th annual Suicide Loss Survivor Seminar. And so that's really unique in the sense that it's one cause of death. And, we include all relationships, including children, because we have a good grief camp that occurs simultaneously during this event. And the work that we do, we've presented on this really throughout the world. We recently just came back from Australia over the summer, where we were invited by their Department of Veterans Affairs to come and train some of their personnel and to hold a very similar event for their bereaved military survivors, where there was a real gap in some of those services. So we're very proud to partner and to collaborate and to share the work that we have done with other people who want to implement this and develop these programs, and really with that goal towards reducing risk and future prevention efforts. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what came out of some of our work in this field, working around postvention with our suicide loss survivors. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to very briefly touch on our postvention model. I say that because this could be a whole training in itself. But from the work that we were doing and from our own experiences of what helped, what didn't help, and seeing what was really working through the programs and the services that we were able to provide, we ended up developing our TAP suicide postvention model. And in that, it's really meant to be fluid, where people can kind of move back and forth through the model as needed. It's not necessarily linear, as we know about grief in general, but we have a couple of things that we really try to focus on. And first and foremost is stabilization. And I'm going to probably talk a little bit more about that the most today. And ideally, what we're doing is we're trying to stabilize some of the most urgent or emergent issues around ideally, as we've already heard, within hours, sometimes hours or days, perhaps weeks of the loss. The more quickly we can do that, particularly with postvention, our goal is always to do that as quickly as possible. So there's less time and space where people who have been impacted by suicide are alone. We want people to feel connected to supports, to resources, to the services that they're needing, so they're not left in isolation, struggling. So we're looking at stabilizing some of those immediate issues around maybe mental health concerns, if they are exposure around trauma related to the suicide, if there is perhaps maybe biohazard cleanup where maybe a family cannot live in the home at the moment. They might need to talk to children about the loss that has occurred. So when we can try to stabilize some of those immediate issues, we found that it was much more likely that in time, and I don't want to minimize or seem that this is rushed, but ideally, when we were able to stabilize some of those immediate issues, we found that it was much more a natural process where bereaved survivors were then able to kind of process the more natural aspect around their grief, where they were more likely maybe to attend a support group, or maybe to show up at an event, or to engage in maybe grief counseling, where they could process a lot of the emotions and specifics around the suicide loss. And then in time, when they had the time and space and people, the safe spaces to do that with, we started seeing this aspect of post-traumatic growth being a true possibility, where now people said, you were there for me. I didn't think it was possible, but by doing some, of that individual work and counseling and getting my kids into grief camp and, working on my trauma, I've really kind of stabilized a lot. I'm in a different place. I want to give back. I'd love to be a peer mentor to newer survivors like myself. So we see this aspect of a newfound sense of purpose and maybe making meaning maybe out of their loss and their experiences, and wanting to give back and do more with their experiences. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that might look like. We'll go to the next slide. As I said, I'm going to focus really more so on the stabilization piece and some of those unique challenges, if you will, that might be different from other causes of death that we look at, particularly with stabilization. And this is going to be very different in each scenario with each person. As we know, people kind of grieve and react different. They have different needs. But these are just a few of those. And we can see that, just some of these might be the impact around relationships, maybe family systems, of how the suicide just can have a devastating impact because people are grieving in very different ways and may have very different needs. And there can be very complex, very overwhelming emotions and feelings. And sometimes they can be occurring at the same time. And sometimes some individuals might be experiencing them very different than others. And this in itself really needs a lot of space to process that. Sometimes there are contributing issues before the suicide that can immensely complicate the grieving process, particularly if there were issues around substance use and or addiction, if there was any type of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, if there were maybe multiple suicide attempts, or where perhaps bereaved survivors may have had their own safety compromised before the suicide. So these are just some of those factors that can really complicate either the trauma and the grief. So we know there's a lot of questions around kind of the whys and if only, and would have, could have, should have. And Denise did a really good job around kind of clarifying that we can't give those answers, but people still need the safe places and people to process that and to talk about that. We know that with suicide losses, tragically, there can be this added element of exposure to that around some of the trauma, particularly if there was witnessing the death or loved ones who may have discovered the individual or their loved one, perhaps at home, maybe in the barracks, with a roommate. And so these are the things that really need kind of very individual, very specific attention and care. And because of that, we know suicide loss survivors could be at higher risk for other mental health concerns, substance abuse, or addiction issues, perhaps the development of trauma symptoms over time. So these are the things that we're really wanting to try to support and to mitigate where we can reduce any potential risk. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll just elaborate a little bit more. And this also was expanded on earlier, and I am so glad that between Denise and Nicola touched on this. And we think about individuals who are impacted as around spouses and partners and children, adult children, the surviving parents, grandparents, siblings, but oftentimes overlooked are, particularly in our military community, might be other loved ones. It could be friends, community members, it could be work colleagues. In our military community, it's going to be, fellow battle buddies, fellow veterans, and oftentimes they might not be acknowledged as somebody who's grieving. And this could be an entire population that we could be missing who's needing support. So when we think about Postvention, our goal is to try to include anybody who may have been impacted that might be needing some support, and that those resources might look different, but nonetheless might still be very needed. Let's go to the next slide, please. And just touching on this aspect around grief and trauma, and I can share very briefly about my own experience. When my husband, he was active duty at the time when he died on base in the workplace, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. But on that day, there were many people who were impacted by his death. There were some people who did not know him, were not necessarily grieving, but they might have been dealing with trauma. There were people who maybe were not there and maybe were not subjected to or being exposed to the trauma, but who were deeply grieving. And then there were people who had maybe both. And I say that because many times with suicide, there can be a lot of complications around trauma. And if we just were to think about symptoms or what that looks like, oftentimes people don't think about the trauma aspect. They just tend to think that if you have had a loss, you must be dealing with kind of grief and loss issues. And some of those symptoms can somewhat seem similar, but they really come kind of from different places. We know that grief is a very natural reaction to loss. And oftentimes with support, with kind of doing some of the grief work and having some of the resources and time and being able to process that, sometimes those symptoms can maybe subside or soften, or people can learn to integrate that maybe into their life moving forward. Whereas trauma is really rooted in this compromised sense of one's safety, sense of fear and well-being. And those symptoms can really be much more kind of elevated or magnified. They can be very intrusive. They can really kind of get in the way of somebody's daily functioning in life and work, with relationships, and can be very debilitating. And so oftentimes, we really need to look at the trauma first and try to get that either stabilized, the people connected to the care that they need. Without that, it's very difficult to kind of move into the natural processing of the grief aspect. And so we want to think about that and just exploring that with people who might be needing some extra level of care. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And just very briefly, kind of talking about the risk around suicide, we really want to just really focus on how can we reduce that risk. And so these are just but a few. This is not elaborate here, but some of the things that could contribute to that increased risk and what we want to try to do to either address that and reduce that. So particularly if there are a lot of other maybe previous mental health concerns or other medical issues, now kind of being compounded by the loss, and within one's community, their culture, around religion, their own values and their beliefs might be complicated through stigma, through shame, through judgment about how suicide is perceived. So they might need some of those safe spaces to process what that means within their loss. And so we always want to look at how we can offer people new strategies around coping with their coping skills, with problem solving, navigating some of the difficult emotions around their suicide loss, where they can process their grief. We know that peer-based support is incredibly not only impactful, but we know the success around connecting to peers is so helpful, as Denise shared with her own story. We also need to couple that with either professional or clinical care when that might be needed. And we know when those things can happen at the same time, we see much more successful outcomes with people being able to stabilize and process their grief in a healthy way. So you might need to get those resources for professional care, referrals for counseling, particularly if people are dealing with some of the exposure to the trauma. And just acknowledging that the grief responses can look very different from person to person, and to know that, that in itself is very normal. And that the understanding around the impact of suicide can have a ripple effect and across families, groups, communities, and we need to be able to support that. Nicola, I think, did a beautiful job at explaining such a tragic scenario of two of their co-workers and how that impacted their entire community, and why those responses and supports were so needed beyond the immediate family members, right? So we want to think about that larger impact as well. And so people who maybe have been impacted by suicide, when they are sharing, might be struggling themselves with either thoughts or actions around suicide. So if that is the case, we really want to think about the same with kind of prevention and intervention around creating safety, depending what they might be needing, because we know that risk could be elevated, but particularly when we're not offering postvention care. So the goal is really about creating safety and reducing risk anywhere we can. Okay, next slide. I want to make sure I'm keeping us on track here. A few other issues for consideration. There could be many more, but I'm just putting several of them here for your general awareness. The things that can add to the complications, the things that people might just be needing more support around, particularly, in the response through, let's say, investigations that could be prolonged, and people, family members are waiting for personal belongings to be returned, or there might be details that emerge in an investigation that they're not sure of, or they're waiting to learn more about. And sometimes there might be issues around either secrets that emerge either after a suicide loss, or maybe they might have become aware of before the loss, that could have been around either kind of deceitful or like untruth, secretive behavior. This might kind of emerge from kind of addiction type of issues, whether it's through the legal system, judicial system, and some of the things that, in addition to the grief and loss, now family members are having to process some other very complicating factors. So we know that there can be a change in our own identity after our loss. So we could have subsequent losses, perhaps maybe the loss of our military community, or with suicide loss, sometimes those who are maybe friends and supporters maybe are not able to support us the way we thought they would because of some of the stigma related to suicide. So that's, starting to change thanks to those of us who have really kind of broken down those barriers and talking about the need for that support. But you can see there are many more here. How memorials are handled, significant dates, milestone moments, memorial days, birthdays, anniversaries, specific holidays that can bring up a lot of emotion. So sharing those, thoughtful messages, or carrying context, or an email or a card goes a long way to when you let people know, I'm thinking about you on this difficult day. Just know, you're in my thoughts. We're going to talk just a minute about the importance of language and safe messaging. If we go to the next slide. And I think it was Denise who already touched on this. So I'm just going to briefly kind of highlight the importance of this. When we talk about suicide, we do really need to address the importance of what we would call safe messaging and language. We always want to use terminology, language that is non-judgmental, that is free from any type of shame, and reduces stigma. And so I gave just a couple of examples here. One you've probably heard us talk about a lot would be refraining it from saying committed suicide, and instead of saying death by suicide or died by suicide, right? Or instead of saying an unsuccessful suicide attempt, we would say a non-fatal suicide attempt. We want to look at suicide the way we would with any public health crisis, and where deaths otherwise might have been able to be prevented and could be proved to be fatal. But when we talk about it in a way that, with the same type of sensitivity, compassion, prevention efforts, that also kind of allows for conversation and dialogue without the judgment and without the shame. So if that's something that you're not used to, maybe it's a new concept to consider, and you might understand there is some why. There's research behind this, and those of us in the field have actually worked for decades to try to change this, and we are starting to see that. You'll see this now with warning indicators. If you're about to read an article, that the following article, contains information around suicide. If you or someone is struggling, we always want to share resources and promote that message of hope and help-seeking behavior. Okay, next slide, because we're going to get close to time here. Just for sake of time, safety planning, crisis response planning, you don't have to do this. It doesn't have to be about suicide. You can use this for times of heightened emotions. For suicide loss survivors, this could be helpful just to kind of navigate times when maybe emotions are really strong. You don't have to be a clinician to do this. Anybody can do this. So think about some of these tools that can be helpful. Next slide, please. Okay, and we're getting close to ending here. I'm going to give you a couple of QR codes for just some of our resources. I mentioned our TAPS helpline number, 24/7. We stand ready to support anybody who might be needing that. Questions, concerns, grief support and care. We have our From Grief to Growth guidebook on support and healing after a suicide loss. We wrote that as survivors for survivors. We have it translated into Spanish as well. What's really good about this resource is this is your free ebook download. We made it so that the civilian community can benefit from it as well. So it's not highly military specific. You can share that with people who maybe want to learn more about supporting suicide loss survivors. And on that note, I think my next slide was really going to lead us into the segue of our Q&A, right? Okay. So Chantel, I think I'm going to bounce it back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Patton. So I'm gonna move us on to our next slide, please. Just trying to move us for time. We have about 5 minutes left in the session. So first though, really quickly, I just want to show that as follow-up for today's webinar, we are going to be offering a 3-part session on postvention. It's going to begin on December 4th. This series is going to allow us to go deeper into the content. So I know some of it was rushed today. There will be more time to dive deeper into those. Across the series, it's going to be covering building foundational understanding of postvention and loss teams, exploring community-driven postvention strategies and practical tools, and learning from experts about supporting survivors and strengthening long-term care networks. So each session is going to feature the presenters from today, along with opportunities for group engagement and discussion. And then registration information is going to be shared in the chat, as well as our listserv link for the topics and the news. So we definitely hope you're going to be able to join us for a deeper learning opportunity. We have about 4 minutes, but I do have some questions we wanted to do out loud. So I'm going to kick it off to you, Denise, with your first question. So often we assume close family members or friends are grieving someone that they deeply miss, but sometimes relationships with the person who died were strained or even harmful. How do we appropriately support individuals who may feel relief or mixed emotions after a suicide loss rather than traditional grief?
This is a great question, and it doesn't happen a lot on scenes, but it has happened in my experience. And you just want to be present to whatever it is that people are feeling, and you want to be affirming, and you want to be kind and compassionate and empathetic. You're not there to judge how they're feeling, and it's super important during the training for volunteers that they don't just view how they're going to serve these suicide loss survivors through their own personal lens, especially if they're a suicide loss survivor, the volunteer themselves, because suicide is complicated and relief and some other factors absolutely come into play. And people need to be affirmed in what they're feeling. So yes, be gentle.
Thank you so much for answering that question. I'm going to move us on just because we have so little time. Nicola, what strategies or avenues are available to find out whether there's a family history of suicide as a prevention measure?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I can tell you from doing the veteran suicide mortality review case reviews that a lot of time this information was included in records from healthcare providers or social service providers. So I think anytime we can incorporate asking those types of questions into our assessments or intakes or things like that, just to assess, adverse childhood experiences overall, but also if through their lifetime they have maybe experienced a loss like that. Other times it was shared by a family member or something. So I think just for us to, in general, increase awareness of the importance of knowing this and how you can better support somebody with it. I think there's a lot of different opportunities in our work to incorporate it, but it does have to be intentional.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Definitely I hope that is helpful for whoever asked the question and anyone else who might have been wondering. So Dr. Patton, We have another question for you that we thought was a good one to kind of end this discussion, a very important question. In the rare situation of a veteran-related murder-suicide, what trauma-informed consideration should guide our initial outreach to next of kin?
That is a really critical question, and I will say, unfortunately and tragically, we respond to those scenarios at TAPS. I will say, we support the families, family members on both sides of this scenario. I would say, for being trauma informed, you need to really make sure that you are consulting, that you're getting subject matter experts. TAPS is here. We stand ready to support that. We just responded to this very recently with another scenario that we worked very closely with the workplace, the colleagues, the family members. We did ongoing grief response groups for free. We did the follow-up with the individuals who were most immediately impacted. We were able to reach out to extended family members. Suicide's already complicated and complex enough, and this just adds an element of just exponential tragedy. But when we talk about prevention efforts, we don't know what we could be preventing. And so, in an extreme scenario, these are some of the most tragic cases, but we still want to look at immediate support. We want to look at messaging. We want to look at reducing risk and supporting all those who have been impacted. So just please know that we stand ready to support with that. And in that guidebook I mentioned, I do discuss that very briefly as a follow-up in one of the subtopics around murder-suicide loss.
Thank you so much. And as you mentioned, that resource, people will be receiving the slides and a copy of the recording as well. But I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for your thoughtful questions and engagement. I know we're running over a little bit, so I'll try to be quick for the ending slides. So next slide, please. So thank you so much for joining us today and for your dedication to support service members, veterans, and their families, and all those affected by suicide loss. The work that you're doing really makes a big difference. Next slide, please. So, and if your organization or team would like support, training, or technical assistance related to SMVF behavioral health or postvention efforts, please feel free to reach out to us, and our contact information is on the screen. So thank you again for being here and for the compassion and commitment you bring to the communities. We hope to see you at the Learning Communities series, and we wish you all a wonderful week. Thank you.